So what's the order, Selim? If you can quickly, I mean.
You first, then Satish Reddy, then Pritham, and then finally Julian.
Can you send Badri participant?
Lucky last. Guys, don't take everything that's in my presentation. Huh? Leave me some. It's a public holiday here, so the institute is dark and empty. I'm all alone in my room.
I'm calling Pritham and Satish.
Hey folks, good
I'm
morning.
calling Pritham and Satish.
Good
morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Deepak.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
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 Hello, Rupa. Hello, Julian.
Hi.
Hello, all the colleagues.
Hi, Deepak.
Hi, Badri. Good to see you.
Yeah. Hi, Selim. Yeah. Good morning.
Hi,
Nice to
Badri.
see you all. Yeah. Hi, Rupa. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. Back in the US.
Yeah. In Seattle now. Yeah.
Good.
And late in the night, right?
Yeah. Not too late. It's about 8:30 p.m. So since I'm on the West Coast, it's easier. Yeah.
We're just contacting the others who have not joined yet. So there will be another couple of minutes.
Nisha, I prepared the PowerPoint presentation, but I don't think it's really the format, no? I mean, I can use them as speaking notes. You're on mute. You're on mute, Nisha.
Sorry, it's a conversational format.
Sure.
So everyone's videos are fine and everyone's voice checks are good.
Nisha,
Yeah.
from class, who is joining? Pankaj, Madan.
Yeah. So we'll just give it.
Pritham is, I think he used the wrong link. So we are trying to get him on this side.
And what
Also
about
Satish.
Pankaj? I don't see Pankaj.
I think we should start because participants have started coming in.
But Nisha, Pankaj isn't here yet, no? So
Yeah.
I'll be done very quickly and we need him.
I'm going to call all of them. So you can, if you want, you can start.
Recording in progress.
Nisha, should I start then?
Let's, okay. Can we go live?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes. Hi, Pritham.
We
Yes.
are live, Nisha, and we've got Pritham and Satish here. I'm calling Pankaj Madan. You can start.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Nisha. First, let me apologize. You had sent a invitation with the Teams link and also a separate Zoom link, so I was a little confused
Oh, okay.
as to which one. The calendar invited had a Teams link, which I clicked on, and then nothing
Okay.
happened. And then I got a call, and I was told I have to use the Zoom link. So
Okay.
apologies for the.
Not a problem at all. Then we should be apologizing, not you. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. We've gathered today to commemorate 25 years of BIMSTEC with our partners, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and NITI Aayog. The topic of today's webinar is regional connectivity. A very warm welcome to all of you. I would like to welcome Mr. Pankaj Madan from CAS, our long-term partners, and Dr. Badri Narayanan, who until recently was with the NITI Aayog, and he was instrumental in forging our partnership on this webinar series. I would now like to invite Dr. Deepak Mishra, Director and Chief Executive ICRIER, to give the welcome remarks. Over to you, Deepak.
Thank you, Nisha, and a very good morning to everyone, and to good evening and good afternoon to those who are in other parts of the world. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to the webinar on the 25 years of BIMSTEC, opportunity and challenges in the post-COVID-19 era. As you all know, BIMSTEC was set up in 1997. It's a regional agreement among 7 countries situated in the Bay of Bengal. The countries are Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka in South Asia, and Myanmar and Thailand in Southeast Asia. It's home to 1.5 billion people and has a combined GDP of close to $3.5 trillion. It is an important connector to multiple regional initiatives, particularly as a key platform for inter-regional cooperation between South and Southeast Asia. As BIMSTEC marks its 25th anniversary in 2022, we at ICRIER felt that this is an opportune time to assess the achievements, identify the areas where improvements are needed, and consider the way forward. So this webinar series is a product of that outcome, and which has been, as Nisha mentioned, our co-partner with NITI and CAS. Apart from working with them, we are also undertaking a capacity building program for BIMSTEC member countries in collaboration with the Asia Development Bank for the Ministry of External Affairs. We're also engaged in a research project on agriculture with ICRIER, which is a bilateral trade between India and Bangladesh. So there's a number of activities involving BIMSTEC countries that we are undertaking in ICRIER. Let me now turn to our panelists. A big thank you to Mr. Badri Narayanan, Gopalakrishnan for helping us in forging a partnership with NITI Aayog on this very important initiative. So I'd like to extend at the same time a warm welcome to Pankaj Madan. I hope Pankaj has joined us by now, the team leader program for CAS India office. It is an absolute privilege that Dr. Rupa, Chanda, the director for the Investment and Innovation Division at UNESCAP, is here with us today, and I'm sure we are all eagerly waiting to hear her keynote address. The focus of this webinar is regional connectivity. In a previous webinar of this series, we had discussed the importance of encouraging cross-border trade, investment, and energy cooperation. Given this context, enhancing regional connectivity across all modes of transportation is an important building block and is fundamental to the process of regional integration. To deliberate on what has been the impediments, what needs to be done to harness the potential of regional connectivity in the BIMSTEC region, we have a very distinguished panel of well-known experts from across the region. In fact, for the BIMSTEC cooperative spirit to give traction, such track 1.5 and track 2 dialogues have a pivotal role to play. And I'm grateful to all of you, all the panelists, Dr. Banerjee, Dr. Sharma, Dr. Julian Clark, and Ms. Reddy, as well as Dr. Nisha Taneja from ICRIER for joining this webinar. So without further ado, let me turn to Pankaj to give his opening remarks. Over to you, Pankaj, and thank you for your attention.
I think Pankaj is having difficulties in joining. So while we wait for Pankaj to join in.
Can you hear me, Nisha?
Hello, Rajkumar.
Cameras, it doesn't matter, but can you hear me? The audio is
Oh,
there.
okay. Yes.
Yes,
Fine,
we
fine. Then
can,
let me carry on.
Yeah.
What's in a face anyway, ladies and gentlemen. So, well, very good morning to you, Dr. Deepak, Badri ji, and the galaxy of panelists that we have assembled here. Yeah, I must thank ICRIER and NITI Aayog, of course, in no particular sequence or order, but for having us as a partner in this very, very forward-thinking project. And this is the last of the webinar. And ladies and gentlemen, let's say that given that the primary rationale underlying the very inception of BIMSTEC in 1997 was to address the lack of connectivity between South Asia and Southeast Asia, today's third webinar on regional connectivity actually stands out as arguably the most pivotal webinar of the series. Still today, 2.5 decades later, BIMSTEC's very raison d'etre remains the will to foster regional connectivity among its member countries. A quick glance at the names of the esteemed panelists present here, as I already said, actually today mirrors this imperative beyond any shadow of a doubt. However, unlike in 1997, the entanglements in today's world have become far more complex, and in particular, the BRI and its geopolitical implications have seriously complicated India-led processes of this nature. Amongst BIMSTEC member states, only Bhutan and India aren't part of any Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure projects. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine set to continue, Chinese attention to its BRI projects in Asia is likely to be intensified further. This puts India in a tough spot to cope with China's renewed and substantial attention to its adjacent countries, making a Delhi-led BRI counter-connectivity strategy within the BIMSTEC framework all the more necessary. From an Indian standpoint, a well-developed transport network between BIMSTEC members also goes hand in hand with the success of key diplomatic policies of Shri Modi's government, namely the Act East policy and the Neighborhood First policy. Additionally, China's growing influence on the military junta in Myanmar and on militant organization in the rugged northeastern states of India can only be countered by New Delhi through intensified regional economic and people-to-people connectivity. Economic isolation due to poor transport connectivity and infrastructure has all along been a major cause of militancy and secessionist movements in India's northeast. Better connectivity would counter such tendencies and further open up the seven sister states to the large market of Southeast Asian countries. Failure to do so, on the other hand, would open the space towards ever-increasing Chinese influence and consequently for a state of perpetual turmoil in this sensitive region. Additionally, the shared goal of a peaceful, prosperous, and a sustainable Bay of Bengal region will only materialize with a thriving connectivity sector, as without enhanced economic cooperation, incentives for closer political cooperation among BIMSTEC member states, especially in the security sector, are highly unlikely. However, that is much easier said than done because it becomes evident when looking at some connectivity projects undertaken by BIMSTEC member countries, such as the trilateral highway project between India, Myanmar, and Thailand. Given the protracted civil war in Myanmar, the conclusion of the Kaliwa-Yagi section of the road in particular has proven problematic. Overcoming such hurdles requires special tact on the part of the Indian government, putting it in a tough spot between the choice between a value-based policy and a more streamlined realpolitik. So I will not go on much further, but I think that proposing feasible solutions to these kind of challenges is what we are here for today at this webinar. The time has come, ladies and gentlemen, for BIMSTEC to take note and strengthen its regional connectivity and cooperation, or to put it into the famous words of Franklin Roosevelt, competition has been shown to be useful up to a certain point and no further. But cooperation, which is a thing we must strive for today, begins where competition leaves off. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I'll now request Dr. Badri Narayanan Gopalakrishnan to give his remarks. He's the former lead advisor at NITI Aayog, Government of India, where he headed the vertical on trade and commerce. And currently he is a senior economist and affiliate professor with the University of Washington in Seattle. Over to you, Badri.
Thank you very much, Nisha. I'm delighted to be part of this webinar. And this, as was already mentioned, this is the third of the three webinars that we have organized in terms of promoting the trade and regional cooperation in BIMSTEC and discussing various research and policy issues that are important here. We had a really rich discussion in the past two seminars on trade and energy issues. And this particular webinar is very crucial, as was already mentioned by Mr. Madan and Dr. Deepak and Dr. Mishra, since it deals with connectivity. And this is an area where there has been quite a bit of progress, as has been mentioned before. And still there is a lot of work to be done here. And there is a lot of scope to work on various aspects here in terms of roads, road transport, railways, rail transport, or it could be ports, maritime transportation, even inland water transportation, civil aviation, and development of airports, and also the multimodal transportation as well as intermodal transportation. Then trade facilitation. All these aspects are a part of this connectivity initiative. And we have to work together to have deep collaboration in these areas. And I think there is a lot to be done here. A lot of synergies exist here. Some countries are landlocked here and they can be connected to the ports using some of these connectivity initiatives. And there could be greater integration of regional value chains later, also joining the global value chains. And this region, at least many of the member countries in this region have been less involved in global value chains. And this interconnectivity can actually promote the integration of the global value chains. So without much ado, I would like to conclude my remarks here, very brief remarks. And I look forward to the great discussion with the really wonderful panelists who are experts in this area. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Badri, for your remarks. Today, the moderator for our session is Dr. Selim Raihan, who is a professor at the Department of Economics, University of Dhaka in Bangladesh. And he's the executive director of the South Asian Network on Economic Modeling, more popularly called SANEM. He's also an honorary senior research fellow at the University of Manchester, and he's on the editorial board of several journals. And what we enjoy the most is actually Thinking Aloud, which is the monthly digest and really gives in a nutshell and in a capsule what's going on in Bangladesh and sometimes in the region and the world. Thank you so much, and over to you, Selim.
Thank you very much, Nisha, and I welcome everyone to this very important discussion today. And I'm really glad to see the kind of new energy which is being brought to the discussion on BIMSTEC. And so far, we have heard that how important BIMSTEC is going to be, especially when it comes to integrating South Asia and Southeast Asia, and especially the channels through which BIMSTEC can generate the gains for many of for the member countries. It includes trade, investment, connectivity, and various other forms. So I don't really take much time at the beginning because we know that we have an excellent panel. And before that, we have a keynote address by Dr. Rupa Chanda. She's the Director, Trade, Investment, and Innovation Division at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. And she is the person who actually I can mention that she has worked quite a lot in these areas. And I'm quite sure in this keynote speech, Dr. Rupa Chanda will tell us what to do and what are the challenges we have in front of us. Over to you, Dr. Chanda, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Selim. A very good morning to all of you. Good morning to Deepak, Badri, Narayanan, Mishra, and Mr. Pankaj, Madan, distinguished panelists, speakers, and all those present in the audience. I'm really happy to be able to join ICRIER and CAS and NITI Aayog to share some thoughts on connectivity in BIMSTEC and why it's important in furthering the BIMSTEC agenda. Today, I got quite excited as I was thinking through this keynote speech because there seems to be a plethora of things going on around BIMSTEC this particular year. Not just because of the 25th anniversary, but I think also because there's more of a geostrategic sort of push and momentum that's coming for BIMSTEC. So as I was thinking through, I thought, let me cover 4 issues about BIMSTEC connectivity, which we all know is really central to integration in the sub-region. First is about the current state of play and recent developments and their ramifications. Second is to reflect a bit on what kinds and forms of connectivity would be needed. I know this is about transport connectivity, but I think the other forms of connectivity are also important and are underpinned finally by transport connectivity again. Third is about the benefits that connectivity can potentially bring to the sub-region and to individual member countries. So one needs to take an overall sub-regional lens as well as an individual country lens. And fourth is to highlight a few supporting elements for BIMSTEC's connectivity vision to be realized. But before I go to these 4 aspects, I wanted to reflect a bit on the broader geopolitical landscape. And Mr. Pankaj Madan sort of alluded to that as well, because BIMSTEC connectivity has to be viewed within what is going on in that larger landscape. Now, if you look at the last 2 years in particular, countries have borne the brunt of 2 successive shocks, neither of which is over yet. Now, these shocks have resulted in skepticism about the benefits of globalization because they've exposed the vulnerabilities due to economic integration. But at the same time, they've really brought greater focus on connectivity to ensure resilience to future disruptions in trade and supply chains. So it's sort of paradoxical. There's skepticism, but we all know that we need to stay interconnected. So the focus has really shifted much more to connectivity than ever before. I think all the discourses in recent times talk about connectivity, supply chains. It's all about this main element of integration. So never before, perhaps, has there been so much talk about connectivity as in the wake of the recent geopolitical crisis, given its implications for food and energy security and enabling access to essential commodities. Also, during the pandemic, when transport connectivity and supply chains were severed due to lockdowns and clamping down on cross-border movement, again, the importance of connectivity really was highlighted. So as the world looks towards recovering from these shocks, building back better and preparing for future crises, connectivity has really emerged as the key issue in enabling economic recovery and resilience. So when we discuss connectivity today, we have to place it within the broader global discourse on its significance for economic security and livelihoods. So that's my first sort of context setting point. There's also the geopolitical backdrop for this region in particular, within which connectivity has to be viewed. We know there's renewed interest from both outside and within the region in the Bay of Bengal for enhancing trade and maritime security for reasons well known. Apart from the fact that there's growing disenchantment within SAARC member countries about the lack of progress. So here, connectivity becomes a key issue, not only because of the founding vision of BIMSTEC, but also it's a means to sort of give momentum to the process that's not working in SAARC. So for this vision to be realized, connectivity means not only connecting the BIMSTEC sub-region, but also connecting it with the wider Southeast Asian sub-region. And this has significant ramifications for trade, maritime linkages, maritime security, as well as for shaping the spheres of geopolitical influence for many countries. I think this connection between connectivity and the geopolitics of the region, including even India-Africa growth corridor issues, so there are really much wider ramifications. Now, after giving this broad context, let me touch upon 4 points I highlighted. So the first is about the state of play in connectivity within BIMSTEC and recent developments. So the record here is not that encouraging. BIMSTEC has been largely, I would say, dormant. Infrastructural, institutional, and procedural bottlenecks within and between countries have impeded progress on seamless connectivity among member countries. And we are all aware of the many constraints: lack of handling capacity at ports, poor port infrastructure, absence of a business-friendly environment, lack of ICT connectivity, inadequate storage and warehousing facilities, poor trade logistics and customs procedures, lack of harmonization of standards and interoperability of custom systems. These are some of the constraints to connectivity in this region. Of course, underlying any lack of progress is always the absence of political will and commitment to address them. However, I would also say there's been some movement in recent years, starting with the 4th BIMSTEC Summit a few years ago and more recently this year's summit. There's now clearly a thrust on enhancing connectivity to promote regional integration. The Transport Connectivity Working Group has been formed. This was followed by the drafting of the BIMSTEC Master Plan on Transport Connectivity. And the 5th Summit has resulted in more concrete progress. Connectivity is not only one of the 7 pillars under the overall BIMSTEC agenda, but it's also recognized as being central to the progress in other pillars, such as trade and investment, people-to-people contact, and even agriculture and food security. Furthermore, the BIMSTEC Transport Connectivity Master Plan has now been adopted by member countries. And the aim is to improve connectivity, as Badri mentioned, through a variety of means, road, rail, maritime, multimodal linkages. And it also addresses cooperation in related infrastructure, trade facilitation, and human resource development. Another important aspect of the plan is that it aims to serve as a strategic document to guide action and promote synergies among various connectivity frameworks, such as the ASEAN Master Plan on Connectivity 2025. There are also a variety of bilateral and multi-country projects that are being implemented. So there's quite some momentum. All of these related developments in BIMSTEC are a break from the past. So I think there's something to celebrate here. But ultimately, whether these initiatives will fructify or not will depend on political will and commitment, as well as mechanisms that are developed to implement them. So this takes me to the second point, which is what kind of connectivity we should be seeking in BIMSTEC, what all should it comprise, and what should be the principles it should embrace. So the main point I want to make here is that connectivity has to be seen broadly. I know we are talking about transport connectivity, but we must link it up with its implications for other forms of connectivity, energy, and ICT in particular. Because often the conversation sort of gets restricted to transport when we hear the word connectivity. But in my mind, all of these have to come together. Energy and ICT connectivity are also important for the region. Energy connectivity is already being seen as an area for cooperation and trade, and I know we've had a webinar on that. But I think there's much greater need to focus on energy connectivity given electricity shortages in the region, the potential of some countries to export energy, and many mutual benefits that can accrue to member countries from energy trade. It also must comprise ICT connectivity given growth in the digital economy, promising prospects for digital trade in goods and services, and the comparative advantage of BIMSTEC countries such as India in ICT services, which can create value chain opportunities within the region. Investment in digital infrastructure and cross-border ICT connectivity is also needed for digitalization of trade, which is increasingly an important element of trade facilitation. So it's important to have a broader vision of connectivity than transport connectivity alone, and a greater focus on developing the requisite national and cross-border infrastructure for transport and logistics, ICT, energy, when we discuss connectivity. And as I said at the very beginning, that all of this has to be actually underpinned by better transport infrastructure. So transport connectivity still remains central to enabling the other forms of connectivity. But the other point I want to make in this context is that there are certain considerations that should be kept in mind when investing in connectivity initiatives, especially transport connectivity, both nationally and sub-regionally. And here I'd like to highlight 3 important principles that recent shocks have brought to the fore. These are the principles of resilience, sustainability, and inclusion. The connectivity infrastructure that's created should be environmentally sustainable and aligned with climate action-related imperatives. It should be resilient in terms of being ready to mitigate the impact of future crises, hence adaptable, well thought out, and forward-looking. And connectivity must aim to further inclusion within the sub-region. This means enabling the integration of women, youth, MSMEs, and disadvantaged segments and hinterland regions into the BIMSTEC market and beyond through trade, investment, mobility, access to finance, and the like. Sectors such as agriculture and industries such as tourism, textiles, food, and agricultural processing should specifically be kept in mind when developing connectivity, as these would greatly benefit from intra-regional connections with huge multiplier effects for poverty alleviation and livelihoods, inclusion-related benefits, and creation of regional value chain linkages. And this brings me to my third point, which I want to highlight, which is why connectivity is important and what are the wider benefits it can bring. So the answer is that connectivity is a key requirement. This is not unique to BIMSTEC. It's a key requirement in any regional integration process to promote trade and investment flows in goods and services, to enable people-to-people contact, facilitate tourism and cultural exchange, among others. So implementation of the proposed BIMSTEC FTA is completely contingent on improving connectivity. And the benefits are many, both at the sub-regional level and for individual member countries. So at the sub-regional level, many of the pending agreements, such as the BIMSTEC Coastal Shipping Agreement, the Motor Vehicle Agreement, can yield significant benefits to member countries by enabling seamless movement of cargo, lowering trade costs, apart from facilitating movement of people, and bringing in potentially more investments. We know that there are many challenges, for instance, in the Motor Vehicle Agreement. At the individual member country level, there are different kinds of benefits that enhanced connectivity would bring. For India, as has been mentioned, connectivity would enable it to build deeper ties with its neighboring countries and would benefit its northeastern states, which are geographically and strategically the gateway of South Asia to Southeast Asia. Better connectivity in BIMSTEC could help its northeastern states to serve as an economic corridor between the two subregions and help in tapping their potential. For landlocked countries in BIMSTEC, better connectivity, of course, would enable access to the Bay of Bengal and to countries of Southeast Asia beyond. For Sri Lanka, better connectivity in BIMSTEC can help strengthen its position as a maritime hub in South Asia. For Thailand and Myanmar, connectivity would enable access to South Asia and balance their engagement with China. Investments in ICT connectivity can help BIMSTEC countries realize emerging opportunities in digital services trade. An example being trading health services through telemedicine and enabling smaller enterprises to integrate through e-commerce. So the benefits are many: strategic, commercial, cultural, social in nature, which could accrue to member countries, but in many different ways. So finally, what's needed? This brings me to my fourth point, which is how do we realize these benefits and give wing to the connectivity vision of BIMSTEC? Some of the required mechanisms and structures are already in place in the form of working groups and pillars, which are led by a designated country, like connectivity being led by Thailand. Mechanisms in the form of master plans, periodic summits, and meetings are also in place. But in the case of connectivity, such structures have to be supported by one very important ingredient, which is financing. Improvements in connectivity will require huge investments to be made in the region. Public funding will not be sufficient for this purpose, especially given stressed fiscal positions. Hence, private sector participation and public-private partnerships will have to play a critical role. This, in turn, means that connectivity initiatives will need to be supported by investment facilitation and promotion efforts within BIMSTEC, the active role of investment promotion agencies, which work in cooperation rather than in competition within the region. It'll also require regulatory frameworks that are conducive to private financing as well as PPPs. And within individual member countries, it will require liberal, transparent, and predictable foreign policies and a conducive business environment. So a lot hinges actually on what is done at the national level, in addition to the cooperation that would be required. So careful thought needs to be given to structure investments and develop the supporting regulatory frameworks if the connectivity initiatives are to bear fruit. So let me conclude by saying that connectivity is the centerpiece of BIMSTEC and will in large part define its success as a regional bloc. The Bay of Bengal region has become very strategic in recent years. It's a region where China's Belt Road Initiative and India's Act East policy both converge and compete. If BIMSTEC can expand and deepen connectivity, it can capitalize on these convergences and can truly serve as a bridge between SAARC and ASEAN, and in the process also provide the much needed momentum to integration in South Asia. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rupa Chanda. It was an excellent presentation. I think you highlighted some of the very important areas, challenges, and what to do to have meaningful integration in the BIMSTEC. And your point about the connectivity is very much well taken, that it's not only the physical connectivity, but there are many other forms of connectivity, and the trade should be at the center, but then you also bring in other forms of connectivity to make the trade connectivity more meaningful. And especially you highlight the point about FTA, that in order to have a meaningful FTA, you need to have meaningful connectivity in all other forms. Thank you. And I'm quite sure the points you highlighted will be discussed by our distinguished panelists. We have 4 distinguished panelists today. And let me bring in the first panelist today, Dr. Puspa Sharma, who is an independent researcher based in Kathmandu, and he has more than 17 years of experience in policy research on trade and development issues. And until November 2021, he was the executive director of Saudi, a think tank based in Kathmandu. So, and I will go to Dr. Puspa Sharma, and we have a couple of questions to begin with for you. First is that, could you share Nepal's perspective on BIMSTEC connectivity, given that it is a landlocked country and infrastructural connectivity is very important for Nepal? And second is that, what are the different barriers to physical and soft connectivity? In particular, could you highlight some of the issues in paperless trade? So 8 to 9 minutes in the first round, then we'll again come back to you in the second round. Over to you, Pushpa.
Thank you, Selim. And thank you, Nisha, for this invitation to this very important webinar. Actually, when Dr. Rupa Chanda has the keynote in the beginning, I think there is very less to say, because whatever that I had also in mind or wanted to speak, I think has been covered very well by Dr. Rupa Chanda. Connectivity actually lies at the heart of any regional cooperation mechanism, because without connectivity, you cannot do anything. Whether you talk about trade, you talk about tourism, ICT infrastructure, energy, everything we talk about, I think, revolves around the issue of connectivity. So this particular webinar on connectivity, I think, is very, very important. And within the BIMSTEC cooperation mechanism, and BIMSTEC also has actually accepted this, and then has kept connectivity at the very heart of the cooperation mechanism within BIMSTEC. And as a landlocked country, if we talk of Nepal, obviously both hard infrastructure, hard connectivity, and soft connectivity are very, very important. Especially in terms of the fact that Nepal has to rely on India, especially for transit. That means to another country for its transit trade to access ports in India, or now the possibility of accessing ports in Bangladesh and in the Bay of Bengal region. The importance of this hard infrastructure connectivity, I think, should not be overemphasized. We all know like how important it is. But also, as I said in the beginning, that connectivity cuts across like many different areas. And for Nepal as a landlocked country, which has not been able to do so far very well on the manufacturing sector, but has prospects in the services sector, the service-related connectivity becomes very, very important. That means, say, for example, the ICT infrastructure. For tourism, tourism has a very big potential in Nepal and also in other BIMSTEC countries, and that also calls for hard connectivity, the roads, railways, airports, and others. So these are areas where I think Nepal will have interest, and where the connectivity issue in BIMSTEC has to go forward. Also, another one is energy. As Dr. Rupa Chanda also mentioned, again, Bhutan, Nepal have this huge potential, as is said, in the energy sector. And the region itself being energy deficit, and where there is energy surplus in some of these countries, the idea of energy connectivity becomes very, very important for these countries. And now within BIMSTEC, when we had these 14 areas of cooperation earlier, and energy was one sector, but now energy has become a subsector within the security sector, should not obscure the importance of energy connectivity. So that should be kept in mind when we talk about connectivity, I think, in the BIMSTEC region. So that is one very, very important thing that has to be kept into consideration. The other one, as Selim also pointed out in his question, is about, I think, the idea of paperless trade. Now, as we are in the digital era, and then the paperless trade is now moving on quite well in many other parts of the world, I think this has got a lot of benefit to bring to our region as well. And especially if I talk from the perspective of Nepal as a landlocked country, where we also deal not with direct trade with our country, but also transit trade. And we have seen, in one way, some benefits of paperless trade. For example, the introduction of ECTS, the electronic cargo tracking system, has so much eased the congestion, has also reduced trade cost and time. So this is one example of what paperless trade can bring, the benefits of paperless trade. So this is one area I think that BIMSTEC can, right from the beginning, although I mean, we are celebrating 25 years of BIMSTEC, but things are moving only now after 25 years. And since the BIMSTEC FTA is still in negotiation, it is yet to come about. But perhaps I think this is an opportune time to also include the issues of paperless trade within the BIMSTEC FTA. I think that this is the right time, because many new regional trade agreements that are coming up have been including the issue of paperless trade within those regional trade agreements. So perhaps BIMSTEC also can take this issue of paperless trade within the broader BIMSTEC FTA. Of course, the importance of paperless trade, I think, need not be emphasized. We all know about time and cost savings, the regulatory compliance, reduction in frauds, revenue leakage checks, also environmental considerations. In that area, I think Nepal has been doing its bit. Now it has put in place the electronic national single window. The idea is to engage 40 different trade-related agencies in this national single window. Many agencies have already been integrated, some are yet to integrate. And I think India also has done a lot of work in this area. Bangladesh is yet to do, and perhaps the other countries are also doing their bit. Now the UNESCAP's framework agreement also talks about the paperless trade agreement, about how this can be taken forward. The most important one, and that we can learn from ASEAN also, is that when we have the national level electronic single windows in place, this can be integrated into a regional single window. And that is an area I think where BIMSTEC can focus on, to establish a regional BIMSTEC electronic single window, and the countries having the national single windows integrated into this regional single window, and through which the paperless trade can be progressed forward. So that's one area I think that BIMSTEC can take on. Similarly, there are other national initiatives perhaps the countries are taking, for example, the development of national logistics policies to deal with the logistics issues within the country. These can be perhaps taken together. These can be integrated together to come up with the regional kind of logistics development in the BIMSTEC region. Paperless trade, I think, is one area that, as I said, has to be emphasized. And when we have the paperless trade at the domestic level, then perhaps we can move on to cross-border paperless trade, because cross-border paperless trade is something that is not only in the BIMSTEC region, but also across the world. Cross-border paperless trade has not been taken forward to a large extent, because there are, I think, many obstacles, especially in terms of the sharing data and documents, electronic sharing of data and documents. So that's an area where cooperation is extremely necessary. So BIMSTEC perhaps can do well in terms of focusing on some of these areas in terms of taking the idea of connectivity forward. So I'll stop here for the first round. Perhaps we can come again in the second round with more issues. Thank you, Selim. Over to you.
Thank you, Puspa. I think you rightly highlighted some of the very important challenges when it comes to paperless trade, especially as some of the recent surveys which have showed that in most of the BIMSTEC countries, they have serious issues. Still, they are lagging in terms of achieving, making good progress in the paperless trade. There are legislative issues, there are rules and regulatory issues, and there are also infrastructure issues which need to be improved quite a lot. And you rightly pointed about the importance of the cooperation among the BIMSTEC countries, because it's not that one country they can do better without the cooperation of the other country. And when you want to have greater regional trade and regional cooperation, we need to actually cooperate, and we need to cooperate, especially in the paperless trade, quite strongly. And you also highlighted the importance of this cooperation, BIMSTEC cooperation, in the context of Nepal, which is a landlocked country. Thank you, Puspa. We'll come back to you in the second round. Now I bring in our second panelist, Mr. Satish Reddy. And Satish has over 30 years of work experience in government of India and Asian Development Bank. And he has worked for over 22 years in government of India, looking after international trade, logistics, free trade, and preferential agreements, customs cooperation agreements, regional cooperation, and many other things. So it is a great pleasure to listen to Satish, and especially the kind of experience he has. So I'm quite sure Satish is with us. Satish, if you can.
I'm here. I'm
yes,
here. Good morning.
Yes, thank you. So we have a couple of questions to begin with. First is that we'd like to hear from you about the experience for BBIN, especially you work quite a lot on the BBIN region. And how do you see whether BBIN can be a stepping stone for enhancing BIMSTEC cooperation? And then taking that experience forward, especially when it comes to BBIN motor vehicle agreement, And how do you see that, whether how could it be extended for BIMSTEC kind of motor vehicle agreement? And in particular, the northeastern states, especially, they have a very pivoting role in materializing this this agreement. How do you see that? What is the kind of status there, and what things need to be done? So 8 to 9 minutes at the beginning. Satish, over to you.
Thank you. I'm audible. Selim, can you confirm?
Yes, you're audible, but we can't see you.
Yeah, you can't, because due to some contingency, I'm traveling, so I would not be in a position to.
Okay, please carry on.
For data efficiency. Thank you. So many thanks to ICRIER and the co-organizers for having me and giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts. Yeah, this is the 25th year of the BIMSTEC conceivement. I mean, though it was initially a 4-country initiative, so it's a very important time to look back as well as to take stock and look forward. By now there's a very structured mechanism. We have 7 countries. There is a 5-tiered mechanism. There are 7 sectors identified. But still, in terms of concrete progress, perhaps there is a lot to be done. Since the topic is connectivity, and Selim has asked me a question about BBN, we must note that as per the BBN chapter, the objectives, multi-dimensional connectivity is one of the objectives listed in the charter. So that's a very relevant topic. Coming to BBIN, it's a 4-country motor vehicle agreement. I think virtually everybody here would know something about it. Essentially, BBIN motor vehicle agreement enables exchange of traffic rights. Or in other words, it enables a motor vehicle of one country to travel into the other country, well beyond the borders. Motor vehicles, of course, would include not just trucks or trailers for cargo, but also it could be by a bus or it could be a personal motor vehicle. So we're talking about both cargo and people-to-people connectivity. While the agreement is a framework level agreement, it enables the vehicular movement. A number of implementing details have been left to be negotiated further. The agreement itself was signed in 2015 June. That's over 7 years back. But it had some roadblocks since then. Bhutan could not ratify the agreement, and it requested the other countries to go ahead. The other 3 countries have to explore a mechanism as to how to go ahead, because BBN had a provision that it will come into effect only by consensus of all 4 countries. So then they had to, after examining international precedents and legal options, they had hit upon another idea of signing an MOU amongst them to take forward the BBN agreement. That is also at a fairly advanced stage. The MOU is on the verge of being signed. As I said, the implementing provisions had to be thrashed out separately. The agreement doesn't go into the nuts and bolts. So there are 2 protocols, one for movement of passenger vehicles and one for movement of cargo vehicles that are under discussion. Here again, the passenger vehicle protocol is almost near conclusion. There are barely 1 or 2 issues left, but the cargo protocol has some more way to travel before it goes to conclusion. The process has been slow over 7 years. Some political issues, some perhaps lack of proper stakeholder sensitization in some countries. Also, the kind of asymmetrical nature of the BBN sub-region, where one economy is large and there are apprehensions in the eyes of others that the logistics sector of that country may dominate the sectors of other countries. But we have been, as part of my work for Asian Development Bank, we've been working to clear some of these misconceptions. The agreement itself has a number of safeguards built into it, which could be used by the smaller economies or countries which are not comfortable with the full-scale opening up right at the beginning. These safeguards could be used, and then depending on the comfort level, then the implementation can be scaled up. There are still a few issues open, including what are the routes to be used, because the vehicles cannot travel indiscriminately. They have to travel along agreed routes through agreed border points. And initially, there would also be agreed volumes of traffic, given the route conditions as well as the comfort level of the countries. These are some of the issues that are still pending. And other issues include fees and charges that need to be levied for movement of vehicles and the conditions of the temporary admission of trucks. since this is a separate agreement, the countries are at liberty to agree on their own conditions for temporary admission. So there are issues. It has taken time, but none of these are insurmountable. We are very optimistic that in the coming year, 2023, all these will be thrashed out and we will actually see implementation, either if not on a full scale, definitely on a pilot scale. In fact, the countries are discussing the possibility of conducting extended pilots before signing the agreement, because we don't want to sign the agreement and then find that some provisions are not so practical. Being its first of kind agreement in the sub-region, perhaps practical experience which can be gained through trials would help in finalization. Now, how can BBN then play an important role in the overall context of BIMSTEC? BBN, of course, is a sub-region which is fully connected by land, Bhutan, India, Nepal. So it makes a lot of sense for these countries to initiate a motor vehicle agreement, because vehicles can cross over only land borders. There is also a separate agreement which was initiated called IMT, India, Myanmar, Thailand Motor Vehicle Agreement, which was supposed to be the soft side of the trilateral highway. But that agreement has not made as much progress as BBIN, because Myanmar and Thailand are perhaps evaluating its implementation feasibility. But going forward, BBIN plus IMT is essentially BIMSTEC motor vehicle agreement. Of course, we have Sri Lanka, but since Sri Lanka is an island nation, if BBIN and IMT become realities, they can easily be merged to become a BIMSTEC motor vehicle agreement. Secondly, BBIN has a very key role to play in enabling last mile. In fact, it's more than a last mile of other agreements. For example, the agreement on use of Chattogram and Mongla ports that India and Bangladesh have signed. While the cargo could travel from Kolkata to Chattogram via maritime route, from Chattogram it has to travel via land into the northeastern part of India or in the reverse direction. So BBIN can play a role there in completing that leg of the transport. In fact, the Chattogram agreement specifically mentions that as and when BBIN agreement is operationalized, it will operate for the land portion of the Chattogram agreement. And similarly, BBIN will also provide an option to the traders for, as we have Chattogram agreement, we also have PIWTT, which is the inland waterway, and BBIN will be an option. So depending on the origin destination points, depending on the trade profile, the commodity, etc., there will be plenty of options to choose for the traders. It is particularly crucial to the northeastern region because it will help northeast to connect both sides. I mean, into Bangladesh, through Bangladesh to the other part of India, and through Myanmar into Southeast Asia. So we have heard in the morning the speakers mentioning how this South Asia and Southeast Asia connectivity is such a key point. And so Northeast is strategically placed to take advantage of both sides connectivity through BBIN and going forward through IMT. But how should it prepare for implementation of this agreement? It should, the negotiation on the routes and volumes, the concerns of Northeast have to be taken. What are the consumption centers? What are the production centers in Northeast? This has to be kept in while devising the routes under the BBIN agreement. Similarly, the infrastructure in Northeast, particularly in terms of inland clearance locations, is very poor. I think there's just one official
Satish, you have a minute left.
Yes, I'm almost done.
Yeah.
So there is only one dry port in Amingaon, just outskirts of Guwahati. There are no inland clearance locations, and the true advantage of BBN would lie if the clearances can be done inland and not at the borders, which are anyway choked. So this is another key point that Northeast has to prepare itself. And then finally, it has to identify those value chains that can take advantage of the BBN agreement. So given the time limit, I'm confining myself to these statements, and as we go forward, would be happy to discuss this further. Thank you. Thank you, Selim.
Thank you, Satish. I think definitely we'll come back to you in the second round, and if you can highlight some of the points you want to do in the first round, you are most welcome. But you rightly pointed out the importance of BBN motor vehicle agreement, because this is an agreement which has been signed by 4 countries and a very comprehensive one. And some of the things you mentioned that the fear of the smaller countries, especially being dominated by the larger countries. These have been addressed in the motor vehicle agreement, but I'm quite sure many stakeholders, they are not really aware of it in the countries, especially even in Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan. So we need to actually have more, I would say, a dissemination of this, some of the analysis of related to this motor vehicle agreement, and to erase those fear. I think this is something very important. We also highlight the importance of how this motor vehicle agreement can be connected to India, Myanmar, and Thailand motor vehicle agreement. Excellent deliberation, Satish. I think this has been extremely useful for our understanding. Let me bring in now our third panelist, Pritam Banerjee. And Pritam Banerjee brings several years of experience in the areas of economic policy, logistics, operation, trade facilitation, and trade policy. He's an independent trade and logistics expert. He is currently engaged as logistics sector specialist consultant with the Asian Development Bank, and is also working with the World Bank on trade facilitation issues. But I have known Pritam for long, actually, because Pritam was previously a senior director for public policy responsible for South Asia region for the Deutsche Post DHL group. So I have a couple of questions for Pritam to begin with. So how can India's domestic initiatives, especially Gati Shakti, national logistics policy, and state logistic policies, be integrated with the regional initiatives? And also perhaps operationally, how does one create regional logistic network? So what are the challenges you also see, in addition to this for the Northeastern region, especially when it comes to integrating the regional domestic initiatives, regional initiatives? And how does India's quality of infrastructure matter for regional networks? Over to you, Pritam. 8 to 9 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thanks to ICRIER and Nishaji for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be amongst old friends and esteemed colleagues. Dr. Raihan, is it possible for me to share a presentation, or that's not
Yes,
allowed?
of course. I think, are you given the right to share?
I can share my screen.
Yes.
It should work, and then I will let me know when my screen is visible.
Yes, it is visible. You can use it in the PowerPoint presentation mode. Yes, excellent.
Perfect. So I know. So to quickly answer your question, what I will try and do in the next about 10 minutes is look at some of the important reforms that have happened in India, and then link it to the discussion that we are having. And my work has been made very, very easy by the remarks that especially Mr. Reddy discussed with the BBI and MVA. So as some of you might be aware that India a year back launched the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti Multimodal Connectivity Master Plan. Now, how does that relate to the BIMSTEC Master Plan, and what's the relevance of it? There are two very important points here. Number one is that unlike the BIMSTEC Master Plan, the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti Master Plan is a national initiative which is based on a very dynamic set of parameters in terms of prioritization for infrastructure. And this goes back to Dr. Chanda's point about national initiatives being important, because different member states of BIMSTEC will have national infrastructure priorities which might not always translate into regional connectivity priorities. So what is important for Bangladesh for its own economy or for its own development, or Myanmar or Thailand's development, they will not always gel to a regional connectivity framework as we see it, but they will not match each other. So the BIMSTEC master plan in some ways is a subset of the national master plans, of which Prime Minister's Gati Shakti master plan is one example. So just to move to the next slide, what the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti master plan does is that it provides evidence-based, data-based dynamic prioritization of national infrastructure development between different modes, different economic clusters and industrial clusters. But it also prioritizes which last mile connectivity to land borders are important. And I'll focus on land borders because in my mind, that's the lowest hanging fruit. A lot of people, definitely it's important to talk about maritime connectivity and even air-based connectivity. But most of those networks do exist already. Yes, there are issues with port operations, etc. But those networks exist and they work pretty well in relative terms. So where BIMSTEC will perhaps add maximum value is to create logistics networks that are truly multimodal, bringing in the road aspect into it. So as I was saying, so this, the Prime Minister, the national master plans, they link with the last mile connectivity to the borders, and there is a prioritization over there. So what needs to happen is that a discussion between BIMSTEC member states about the national priorities and about then underlining which of those last mile connectivities on both sides of the border can be prioritized. And that will come to the larger idea I'm trying to discuss, called what I call highly facilitated trade corridors. And that goes back again to Dr. Chanda's point that there's a huge financial outlay with limited resources under stressed times. So what BIMSTEC would have to do to make progress is perhaps countries deciding and agreeing upon 2 to 3 perhaps key corridors of connectivity for transport that will be optimally beneficial for all member states, and then kind of invest their scarce resources over there. So the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti master plan in that sense is a force multiplier, because it identifies certain last mile connectivities as well and prioritizes their rapid implementation. Given that India's hinterland, as you would appreciate given its geographical situation, is also important to the landlocked BIMSTEC members like Nepal and Bhutan for transit purposes, this is important as well. The other important reform that happened in India, this very recent, just last month, a couple of months ago, the national logistics policy was announced. The national logistics policy is basically the soft part of the reform. So one is the infrastructure physical development, the other part is the kind of procedural and regulatory reforms to ensure that logistics operations get facilitated maximally. Now, if I look at some of the flexibilities that are being made available under the national logistics policy here and kind of juxtapose them into a wider BIMSTEC context, the idea behind national logistics policy is to identify those reforms, those changes that will enable logistics operators to develop efficient multimodal operations. Now, again, as Mr. Reddy very wonderfully described, the key, if I look at this region that will need to happen, is the motor vehicles agreement. So we already have a VVN motor vehicles agreement, which Mr. Reddy discussed, but there's also under discussion a BIMSTEC motor vehicles agreement. And what needs to happen in that motor vehicles agreement from a logistician's perspective, in terms of the facilitations required, is that I will not perhaps for the because limitations of time go through in detail with all the points I make in this slide, but to basic idea is to allow maximum flexibility to do all kinds of things. So first, what Mr. Reddy mentioned, of course, allowing trucks to cross borders, but not just that. You need to have associated protocols for customs and other processes which allow you, as he was mentioning, inland clearances, because you want to do the least at the border. You customs clear in the inland location, and in the border itself the truck pretty much whizzes through with nothing but a seal check. So you use technologies like ECTS, which even Puspa mentioned, the electronic cargo tracking system, and RFID, passive RFID seals, which provide assurance to regulators that everything is pretty much okay. And all they do at the border is scan the seal and let the truck go. That will of course clear up a lot of the congestion. It will also add to the point that Dr. Chanda was making about resilience. One of the factors of resilience we learned during the pandemic was that if you make operations at the border points less complicated, less time demanding, human resource demanding, you end up having better outcomes. But also the flexibility is about allowing multi-stage, multi-country cargo in the same truck to allow the development of business. So what do I mean by that? When I was in DHL, I was fortunate to kind of be responsible for the first the pilot that happened under the MVA, where a truck carrying cargo for both Bangladesh and for Northeast India in the same truck crossed the border, dropped the cargo for Bangladesh in Dhaka, continued on to the Khawra border in the northeastern part of the country, and carried the Indian cargo. So when you allow multi cargo trucks to cross borders, it allows you to develop businesses faster. It brings down cost for SMEs. Similarly, again, allow tractor trailers. So, sometimes you have seen trucks where there is a prime mover and a trailer. The operator might not want to take the whole truck across and just allow the trailer to cross. Allow change of drivers, because different countries have different languages, signages. So it might be useful for the operator to change drivers at the border and hire a local driver instead of having the same driver go through.
Pritam, you have around a minute left.
Okay, so so to quickly go through, I wanted to go through some examples, but let me kind of end with the examples that one example and then make my final point. So if you look at if I just take the the one in the middle, the multi-stage network, you could have a network where because of these kind of facilitations provided, a truck can travel from Thailand carrying intermediate products for the textile RMG industry for both Bangladesh and India, come to Mandalay, hand it over to an Indian truck. The Indian truck takes it to across the More border in Manipur, puts it on a train. The train goes to Siliguri. The Bangladesh cargo is handed over to a truck there and sent to Dhaka, while the rest of it carries on to somewhere in North India to a factory. So this kind of very efficient network that even SMEs can afford can be built if you focus on corridors and if you focus on the facilitation. Last quick point, therefore, is this idea of highly facilitated trade corridor, right? So the point that I'm trying to make over here is that all the building blocks exist, right? So you have national master plans. Prime Minister's Gati Shakti is just one example, but every country has their infrastructure priorities which need to be synergized, and the key corridors identified where all countries more or less agree upon. Then, of course, in the BIMSTEC master plan, you already have coordinated border infrastructure development interventions, which could be fast-tracked for these specific corridors. And then, motor vehicle agreement can provide you with all the facilitations required. Last but not the least, you have focus on paperless and systems operability. You already have building blocks in terms of both the BIMSTEC focus on trade facilitation, but also on the framework agreement of the UNESCAP for paperless trade. So in the region, we have all the building blocks there. What we need to perhaps identify is a couple of key corridors, identify them as highly facilitated trade corridors, and countries focus on them, their limited resources and bandwidth. And then, once those become operational, the benefits become well known. You can slowly, incrementally then focus on other corridors as well. Thank you for your time. Back to you.
Thank you, Pritam. I think you rightly pointed out the importance of connecting the regional initiative with the national initiative. And at the same time, one point I'd like to just add that they're looking at even Bangladesh's recent emphasis on building infrastructure. And we know that there's a Padma Bridge is being constructed and several other mega projects which are in place. But to take your point, I fully agree with you that even to get the right kind of return from those big investment, you need to put them into the bigger regional infrastructural network. And then I think the return from those projects would also be larger. So even the national initiatives, if they remain isolated, they will not get the right kind of return. Thank you, Pritam, for highlighting very important point. And you also laid out some of the very important suggestions how to take this agenda forward. So our last panelist for the first round is Dr. Julian Latimer Clark, and he's the resident specialist in the Trade and Investment Facilitation Department of the Mekong Institute. And Dr. Clark was the senior economist Southeast Asia for the World Bank for 12 years, where he oversaw large trade and investment programs in countries such as Cambodia, Laos, PDR, Mongolia, Vietnam, and contributed to country programs in Brunei, Malaysia, and Thailand. And he has worked with multiple department partners such as the DFAT, the European Union, DFID, and various organs of the United Nations. I'm quite sure that Dr. Clark will bring in his experience, his very rich experience in the context, what he gathered in the context of Southeast Asian countries. But let me just put forward a couple of questions for Dr. Clark. That the BIMSTEC countries share borders with Thailand and Myanmar. Why has this favorable geography not yet paid dividends? And given the appetite for increased trade linkages, why have they not yet become established trade routes? Will the recently signed master plan for transport connectivity be the key to unlocking some of the logistic and physical barriers to cross-border trade into the Southeast Asian economies, and what are the ambitions should BIMSTEC countries have for increased connectivity over the short to medium term, and also your take on the kind of value chain integration in the BIMSTEC countries. So over to you, Dr. Clerk, 8 to 9 minutes in the first round, please. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Certainly a pleasure to see old colleagues such as Dr. Deepak, and to be with Dr. Selim, who I know by name, and finally to meet you in person. Thank you, Dr. Mishra, for organizing, and of course, greetings to Dr. Rupa and other distinguished panelists. So I am going to take a little bit of a practical approach to see what's going on at the borders, and you'll have to excuse my World Bank background because I'm going to talk a little bit about the statistics and the trade facilitation a lot. Of course, some of the first speakers have stolen some of my points, but I'll try to make them in a little bit of a different way. So I'll be talking about trade in goods, and I'll be talking about firstly the land border transit points between Myanmar and India. I'll move to maritime connectivity, and I'll say a few words about air connectivity also. Now, I prepared a slide presentation, but I think it's useful perhaps since many of the points have been made already that I circulated later. And I'm going to start with just some small comments. I'm going to look at the physical infrastructure, think about regulatory harmonization, and I'm also going to talk about tariff reform because there seems to be some market barriers that are affecting trade at the border, less so perhaps in the maritime sense. Now, if you look at the index of export market penetration for the BIMSTEC countries, what you're seeing is very high export market penetration for India and Thailand, very low for the others. We're also seeing some infrastructural difficulties. For example, the time, distance, and cost on road transport is very high in the smaller countries, Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, India a little bit better, and Myanmar and Thailand are the standout in this respect. So what exactly is going on at the border? As you know, the land border only comprises about 10% of the value of trade between India and East Asia. Most of it's moving through maritime connections. So what's the story here? I think part of it is the composition of trade. And this speaks to also the lack of integration into value chains so far. The composition of trade at the land border, not between India and Southeast Asia generally, is rather low value, high frequency goods, small agricultural products, some small component electrical manufacturing and optics. And these lend themselves to smaller quantities in high frequency. And this puts an enormous stress on what are already rather backward customs and border points. Obviously, if you're at a border point, you prefer containerized traffic because it's efficient, it's time and cost effective, and it can quickly clear the border to an internal container depot where all the trading, the risk assessment and so on can take place. Instead, what we see at the border is a series of small logistics operators in a line with drivers taking a long time to fill out paperwork, and a lack of risk assessment because the customs officials literally have to assess and inspect everything at the border. So this is creating a bottleneck, which is also a disincentive to the other disincentives we've already heard about today. It also speaks to a problem with the harmonization of reforms, because on the Indian side of the border, there's been a very pronounced upgrade in the customs and border facilities. But to the extent that has not been reflected on the Myanmar side, this undermines the reforms that India has made. So when we think about the type of issues at the border, what is the difficulty in penetrating those markets? I think we can't go forward without thinking about tariffs. The high tariffs in most of the BIMSTEC countries compared to Thailand and Myanmar. So it's been quite difficult to penetrate markets, even though exports to the Indian side of the border are much higher than those coming into Myanmar and Thailand. So there is a case to be made about high tariff barriers, perhaps slowing down the input of the private sector. And as we know, the private sector is going to be driving the policy changes and driving the creation of the value chains. So what are the gains for reducing, we're still talking about land borders here, what are the gains for reducing the waiting time at the border? Recent research by my former colleagues at the bank in the Western Balkans has come up with some gains of between 0.5% and 1% for economies that reform at the border. But the important point is that these reforms have to be mutually carried out. Otherwise, the reforms are less significant. And this points to an overall theme of the work I've been doing and in looking at the issues here, which is that a free trade agreement would solve some of the problems in building the value chains across the border. So better roads, less time at the border, lobbying from the private sector, and perhaps the establishment of special economic zones. So I also wanted to think about maritime connectivity. This is where the bulk of trade is taking place. This is in terms of fuel and automobiles, a huge amount of trade going down the coastal routes into the ports of Myanmar and Thailand. The issue here is the lack of deep water ports and the lack of a strategy. As we all know, the connectivity master plan has been signed, but a lot of projects are still in process with some delayed deadlines. So while India is making a lot of effort to modernize their customs and border procedures and put in place ports that are capable of deep water ships, the Myanmar side has not been so good. And in Thailand, the Dawei port is currently trying to upgrade, but it's not there yet. So there tends to be a lack of efficiency on that route just because of the size of the ships that are able to go down the coast. Now, on air connectivity, it seems to be very good, but of course it depends on a high value to item ratio. So the air connectivity to an extent is limited to the type of items that can be traded. On soft infrastructure, we've talked a lot about the national single windows and the automation of customs procedures and paperless trade, but it can't be emphasized enough, including the mutual recognition of goods and transit agreements that would facilitate the land border crossings in particular. These can be supplemented by a special economic zone policy. What we've seen in Southeast Asia is that special economic zones have been important drivers of the creation of these value chains across what we call factory Asia, where they have been small geographic areas in which you can pilot reforms, in which special transit procedures can be put in place, and it's allowed for the quick transit of goods and allowed for manufacturing processes that start in Malaysia and perhaps end in Ho Chi Minh City. So on that front, cross-border trade agreements might be a medium-term solution, with a longer-term solution being free trade agreements. I think a lot of the other points I was going to raise have been covered already, so I'll leave it there and perhaps we'll come back to it in the second round. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julian. I think you rightly pointed out the importance of the trade agreement, especially some of the tariff issues. And then it's true that among the BIMSTEC countries, some countries, they already have some high tariffs and those need to be resolved. And it's not only the tariff, but then associated different kinds of para-tariffs, the non-tariff issues, many things actually, because they need to be sorted out. And you also, towards the end, highlighted the importance of the special economic zones and how they can be very, very instrumental in having a meaningful cooperation, regional cooperation in this region. So what we'll do now, we'll go to the panelists again for the second round interventions, and we'll stick to around 3 to 4 minutes. So I start with Puspa. Puspa, could you share some of the form of learnings from other trade blocs, especially we know that among the 7 BIMSTEC countries, we have 5 countries from South Asia. So what has been the experience from South Asia or SAARC? And also, what do we learn from ASEAN as well? And how we can bring those lessons for successful BIMSTEC cooperation? Over to you, Puspa.
Thank you, Selim. I think there are perhaps lessons to learn and lessons to not learn from some of these earlier initiatives, right? Especially when you look at SAARC, of course, like it's not that SAARC didn't do anything. There were some progress in SAARC as well, but many of the things, especially when you talk of connectivity, like the SAARC motor vehicle agreement, that never came up. And now I was reading earlier news yesterday about the SAARC Secretariat itself is going to be leadership-less very soon. because of the political, I think, problems in the region itself. So from SAARC, I think there are many things that that we should not learn. But indeed, BIMSTEC is taken as a bridge between the two regions, South Asia and Southeast Asia, and two countries from Southeast Asia are there. And I think Julian very well articulated about like what are the things that perhaps South Asian countries can learn from Southeast Asian countries in terms of connectivity, whether it is about taking the idea of paperless straightforward, linking the SEZs together, creating the value chain. Here, I would want to emphasize on the importance of the lesson that, again, it is not perfect yet, but I think it is the ASEAN Single Agreement and ASEAN Single Window is arguably the first regional agreement to be, that was concluded. And ASEAN countries themselves are at different levels in terms of implementing it. But at least the countries, the member countries have been connected. The national single windows have been connected. And whatever is possible, they are doing it. And not that all the member countries have to do all the, paperless kind of trade, meaning like everything related to trade in the paperless form all at once. This can be a gradual step that can be taken, right? So that's one lesson perhaps the BIMSTEC countries can take. So go away with developing the national single windows, create the BIMSTEC national electronic regional single window, connect them together, and gradually go on with doing what is possible in the beginning, and then gradually expanding it further. So that is perhaps one lesson that I think BIMSTEC can learn from ASEAN, especially in terms of taking the idea of paperless trade forward. The other ones, indeed, as the earlier panelists also highlighted, some of the regional, the domestic or the bilateral or sub-regional initiatives which have already been there, BIMSTEC has to build on those initiatives that are already in place to come up with a BIMSTEC regional kind of a cooperation. The BIMSTEC cooperation doesn't mean that everything has to be created anew. The building blocks are there. Some of the initiatives are already there. So those initiatives need to be expanded on. The BIMSTEC regional cooperation has to build on those initiatives that are already in place, be that BBIN, be that the initiatives under SASEC, or bilateral mechanisms between any two countries like India, Nepal, or trilateral kind of mechanisms. And this relates to all kinds of connectivity that I highlighted in my earlier intervention, whether that is about roadways, railways, maritime, energy cooperation, energy connectivity. So things are there. We need to build on that. The countries have to build on that to make the region, BIMSTEC regional cooperation move forward. Because the encouraging thing about the BIMSTEC after 25 years is that now we have the BIMSTEC master plan in place, but there are other agreements still that needs to be signed. So signing and keeping these plans and strategies in place is one thing, but implementation is actually the challenge, the key. So that is where perhaps the focus has to be of the countries in the region. I think I will not take much time, 3 or 4 minutes. I'll just.
Yes, Puspa, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go to Satish. I know Satish has a bit of connection issue, but Satish, you can still at least say for 2 to 3 minutes on your key recommendation, especially learning from other regions. And you talked in your first intervention on the motor vehicle agreement. Over to you, Satish.
Thank you, Selim, and thank you for accommodating. So I just wanted to the lessons from other regions, particularly when we look at how BIMSTEC has progressed over the past 25 years, in terms of a formal structure, in terms of a charter, in terms of defining the areas of cooperation, initiating negotiations on several agreements, that's where BIMSTEC does score pretty highly. But in terms of concrete delivery or reaching logical culmination of all this, I think there is much to be desired. Maybe the countries themselves or the foreign affairs ministries of the countries would know better, but there is a kind of stop-start progress in terms of BIMSTEC. It seems to be event-led. When there is a summit or an external affairs ministers meeting or some sectoral meeting, some progress is done, and in between there's no the enthusiasm is not sustained. So this is, I think, a problem that needs to be addressed, whether also the secretariat, while it is formally established in Dhaka and has a few officials, I'm not sure what skill or expertise lies in the secretariat to sustain these initiatives and to take these to conclusion, because we know the reality of the region is that officials are busy. They do prepare and come for meetings, but in the gap between the meetings, they will need a lot of technical support in terms of opinions, or maybe conducting an analytical study, and possibly the secretariat may not be geared towards supporting them. So therefore, it just becomes that when there is a meeting, everybody comes, talks, and then they go back, only to come back to the next meeting again. So I think this is a key weakness that needs to be addressed. So if we see other regions, for example, where ADB is supporting, like GMS or CAREC in Central Asia, there is a much better, stronger structure. There is a very strong support by the secretariat. In fact, one might even say that there is a lot of serving on the platter kind of role done by the secretariat. I'm not suggesting that, but I think this is institutional weaknesses should be addressed. The other point is that several initiatives which are being mentioned, whether it is a motor vehicle agreement or implementation of paperless trade, should better be initiated across some key corridors. So I think a corridor approach is very important. It should not be just seen as agreements or initiatives between countries. It's going to be very difficult. There will be apprehensions, there will be infrastructural issues. So take some key corridors and then try to implement these, and then let those corridors or let those implementation initiatives be a demonstration effect for others to scale up or to replicate or to follow. I think that is important. And I think this is an approach which has worked in other regions, even in GMS CBTA, the cross-border transport agreement. It has worked well in certain corridors, not so well in other corridors. So rather than try to negotiate it as an inter-country agreement, I think a corridor-based approach is much more pragmatic. And I think Preetham has also mentioned HFTCs as one possible way. I think that pretty much aligns with that idea. So these are some of the good practices that we have seen from other regions. Another point which is very important, again, I think from Preetham's presentation, is coordinated border management. It exists in many hues and colors and breadth. There are even examples of one-stop border shops where two countries sit together and conduct the regulatory business. Now, well, that's a far way away. The soft side of CBM should still be tried out, be it electronic exchange of data among countries, be it harmonizing certain documents. So there are examples of a single document agreed by country at a manifest level, for example. There's even a project supported in CAREC between China and Mongolia. So I think you should start with the soft side of CBM and then look at maybe a physical sharing of facilities or co-location, etc. going forward. And we are investing a lot of money a kilometer from away on either side of the border, which is a kind of waste of resources as well. So CBM is another good practice from other regions that can be replicated. Lastly, on BBN, just to expand that apprehensions are real. I mean, one cannot dismiss them, but there has to be a lot of sensitization using the provisions of the agreement and the protocols which are yet to be finalized. The safeguards that exist include limitation on the number of routes, limitation on number of permits to start with, limitation on the type of traffic. So let countries at least experience it in some scale, particularly those with more apprehension, so that they gain that comfort, and then there can be efforts at broadening the agreement. So I think this sensitization experiment, has to be taken up maybe all by the think tanks, by the governments, and everybody maybe in this room. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Satish. Very, very useful recommendation. I go to Preetham. Also, any key recommendation, and also you can focus on the Northeastern because they play a very, very pivotal role in this BIMSTEC cooperation.
You mean Northeastern part of the region?
Yes, the kind of national initiative and the regional initiative. Yes.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Raihan. So, I think Mr. Reddy has made my job infinitely easier because he's already highlighted what I would have wanted to highlight on. And I will not like to focus on the Northeast because I believe that's an artificial focusing. Because what we have been discussing so far are the two constraints, right? One is the resource constraint. In overall, countries have different priorities other than regionalization. So the priorities that the national priorities will have to be dovetailed into the regional priorities. And the second layer, as I was mentioning, as Mr. Reddy also highlighted, those points where both countries have a shared interest. So the border points, the corridors where different countries have a shared interest, those have to be synergized. That and the other constraint that we have is, as was mentioned, the institutional constraint in BIMSTEC, and I think it is true for the whole region, not just BIMSTEC centric. So my challenge always has been that trying to do too many things at the same time, trade agreement, a comprehensive trade facilitation agreement, all of that perhaps is not the right way because you have resource constraints. So how do we bring focus? By identifying, as we said, maybe a few corridors, few countries join together, and they focus on that, and they have a timeline to implement all the small things that need to be done. And where does the small things are identified? And this is, I think, where we have to let go of the top-down approach, where policymakers or people sitting in a secretariat decide in isolation. Because no matter how good the infrastructure you built and what kind of facilitations you develop, till you have identified what the logistics operator needs, you will have an empty road and empty borders. Because businesses have to be feasible commercially and operationally for logistic services to operate. So having that perspective, that what are the flexibilities the logistics operator needs, what are the the infrastructure facilities logistics operators needs. For example, just building an ICP or an ICD or a zone in a particular region might not be effective, because that's not the operational model for the kind of goods you are carrying at present in the short to medium term. So to understand the specific requirements of logisticians, and then identifying the kind of interventions you need, both in terms of infrastructure and in terms of policy and procedures, creating a work plan, having a timeline, and doing it for one or two corridors. That, as was mentioned, that has worked in many places. The one last example I would like to highlight why it is it's important is that it worked for the China Europe rail, right? And this was a corridor that was developed without any agreement per se, explicitly. One can say that China played an oversized role in getting it done, which is perhaps of course true. But then how did China manage to get this done without so many formal agreements or structures being in place? It simply did this kind of an incremental approach and ensured that the interest of the countries in transit and the end destination countries are aligned to that extent and is economically feasible. So I think if we take this approach, I think we can go a long way instead of taking a kitchen sink approach and trying to do too many things at one go. I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pritam. Thank you. Over to you, Julian. Any sort of key recommendation?
Yes, I think I could not agree more with the previous speakers. And I think that, look, one of the drivers of, let me start a bit earlier. I think back in 2008 to 2012, I was in East Asia for the bank. I mean, first as a consultant and then staff. The discussions we had at that time were very much what the previous speaker said. They were philosophical discussions about what trade reform might look like. And that went on for a few years without much implementation. So the key point is here, what was the driver that moved these discussions from the philosophical into reality? And it was the private sector. And it was a big push from private sector, particularly multinationals coming in that had been in Malaysia or had been in China, coming into Thailand, and then driving this value chain across the region so they could do the just-in-time manufacturing. So I think the role of the private sector is key. And I think the private sector will come in when the tariffs come down and market penetration is easier. That said, I mean, it's already happening naturally. So I think everyone's talking about BIMSTEC right now. And even here at the Institute, of all places, China, Southern China has tasked us with a research project to see what the implications might be of trying to get in a free ride on the BIMSTEC process. Going back to some of the issues that I raised, I think we've said it already, but there is this problem of different regulations in BIMSTEC countries leading to a sort of distorted information and creating some market barriers. We did an investment climate assessment here at the Institute, small scale, of SMEs in India, asking them why they weren't coming into the East Asian value chains. And they said, well, not only did they not have contacts, but they didn't understand the rules and regulations concerning that market. And they said the same about intra subcontinental trade. Some of the commonly used routes, I think it's important to note, are not currently included in the connectivity master plan, and that includes coastal waterways, which are dragging their heels quite a bit. And if we think about how massive the trade is within Asia and compare it to the potentially massive trade coming out of India, perhaps directly to Thailand, then that might be a useful priority for policymakers. And of course, I mean, I think we have to realize that progress has been slowed down and will continue to be a little bit hampered by not just the political situation, but this issue of coming back out of COVID. Well, those are my only points. Thank you again.
Thank you, Julian. And I must thank the panelists because they were very much on time, especially in making their points and interventions. So we have around 7 minutes for questions and answers. Unfortunately, Satish had to leave because of his connection issues. So we still have 3 panelists. And in the Q&A box, I see there are 3 questions or comments. So let me read out this, and then I'll get back to the panelists for around 2 minutes interventions. So Bishwajit Mahapatra, he raised the question, when improvement in connectivity has both negative and positive influence on political regimes of smaller countries, do you agree that governments, while are showing keenness to improve connectivity, they also need to adopt political reforms towards sharing power simultaneously? So it's more of the kind of probably having a favorable political reforms towards regional connectivity or regional cooperation. Ashok Atri asked the question of, I think the question was on the non-tariff barriers, especially how it influences on BIMSTEC connectivity and what progress has been there in this area, especially on easing the non-tariff barriers. It's a very important point which has been mentioned. Another question is some Mr. Cole. On issues of connectivity, I feel that BIMSTEC has not taken up the importance of air connectivity, which provides a great impetus to business development and tourism. So, and also, I think it was mentioned about the Assam, the kind of fund which has been devoted for creating regional hub covering BIMSTEC and ASEAN countries. But unfortunately, this was not being followed up. And finally, there is another question on what is the Myanmar economy outlook in 2023 and beyond. Probably Julian can respond to that too. So I leave these questions to the panelists to decide which one to answer. Not each of these need to be answered by each of you. You can, maybe Puspa can talk about the non-tariff issues, which is very important. I start with Puspa, and then Julian can talk about the ASEAN and other air connectivity issues too. And Preetham, I leave it to you. You are an all-rounder. You can respond any question. So Puspa, over to you.
Thank you, Selim. I think, yes, these are very important questions, and especially the one on non-tariff barriers. We all know, although like Julian stated the importance of bringing tariffs down further, that still has to be on the agenda in terms of liberalizing trade further. But if we talk of Nepal in particular, I think given its economic size, its competence, perhaps it has done its bit in terms of bringing down tariffs, and also given the kind of trade deficit that the country has been facing, hugely over the years, I don't think it would be a palatable kind of a reform agenda that the policymakers would readily accept in terms of going down with the tariffs further. We might have to wait and see how things will evolve in order to make this agenda palatable for the policymakers in terms of tariffs. But non-tariff barriers, yes, we all know, despite the tariffs going down, non-tariff barriers, as we have seen in the case of trade with among the SAARC countries, even at the sub-regional level, at the bilateral level, I think is a big issue. And the agreement themselves have not been able to do much in this area. Because when you talk of non-tariff barriers, and this almost again has become like a cliche that we often tend to confuse non-tariff barriers also with non-tariff measures, which oftentimes are, I think, relevant kind of things that are imposed. But then that calls for perhaps more capacity building, more awareness raising to the stakeholders themselves, and that is what perhaps might be needed in BIMSTEC. Now, we don't know how the issue of non-tariff barriers will be addressed by BIMSTEC countries, because the BIMSTEC FTA is still to come to fruition. The BIMSTEC FTA is still being negotiated, and I am not actually, personally aware about the kind of negotiations that are on and what kind of issues the countries are going to take on the NTBs. But I think there are lessons that countries can already learn from the experiences, from the other kind of cooperation in terms of what can be done about addressing the issue of non-tariff barriers. But particularly, I would think that the idea of capacity building, and when we say capacity building, it's both on the soft and the hard part, because it's all about building the right infrastructure in order for countries to comply with the standards, the SPS and TBT kind of arrangements. It's about capacity building of human resource, and this I can talk from Nepal's perspective, where despite having some of the good infrastructures to address SPS issues, there's lack of human resource. So that is perhaps where the area is needed. And for all this, again, investment finance is key. And perhaps the chair himself has done a lot of work in this area. So there's no one better than perhaps Selim who can address this issue himself. But I think in the BIMSTEC FTA, these are some of the issues that has to be negotiated and taken on board. I think I'll just take that on NTBs at the moment.
Thank you, Puspa. Thank you. Pritam, you can mention on the air connectivity, importance of air connectivity as well, and any other points you'd like to add.
Thank you, Dr. Raihan. So on the air connectivity, and I think even Julian was mentioning, this region is pretty well connected by air. Air is typically, it works like maritime and hub and spoke. So you will not have, direct connections between all regions, all sub-regions in the country with all sub-regions. But the networks are quite well established. The cargo rates also are pretty competitive. Some regions are underserved. They're underserved because there's always a chicken and egg problem. You have to have, some level of cargo agglomeration and cargo volumes before services can be offered. Those are business development issues. And on a case-by-case basis, state support could be looked at where opportunities exist and a little bit of hand-holding or, that kind of last feasibility funding is required. I'll just, the other quick question I would like to handle, from a slightly different perspective is on the political question that was made on the political environment in the country. I think it's a very vital question, because till the time that in the democratic situation, and many of the BIMSTEC member states are democracies, you have the support of the wider population for these initiatives. These initiatives will not succeed. There will be resistance. But in our region, like in all other parts of the world, we have a twin problem. One is, of course, the need to develop this kind of deep stakeholder engagement to actually convey the benefits of the BIMSTEC, different aspects of BIMSTEC's connectivity to the population at large in a language that is, acceptable and understandable for them. But there are also strong vested interests which want to prevent this from happening, especially in the logistics and transport sector, where because of these connectivity challenges, they make extra rents, extra profits. So how do you get around this challenge? I think that's going to be a major civil society role. I think people like you, Dr. Raihan, and SANEM and ICRIER and others have a huge role to play in trying to break this circuit and bring the real message to the people, because vested interests are small in number, they're always better organized than the wider population. So that's where civil society groups like yours come in and play an important role. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Pritam, for bringing in the very, very important issue of the whole broader political economy issues, especially how different stakeholders, they have their role in in different issues related to BIMSTEC cooperation. But I think one important point was the overall political environment as well, overall the political situation. And probably one issue which we did not really discuss, and probably a bit sensitive as well, but I leave it to Julian to respond. The political situation in Myanmar, the way whether it becomes a kind of stumbling block for many of our connectivity plans. So, but because of the sensitivity, you don't really need to respond many things. But just to highlight, the one question was that of the economic outlook of Myanmar, and any other points you'd like to mention raised in the questions. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much. Of course, I'm not a Myanmar expert, and I just know the bare bones of what's going on, both from Myanmar people here and also from just the economic numbers. They've got massive runaway inflation. I think it's already 16%. I'm not sure if that's because of the bond market or if there's some other problem. They may or may not be borrowing from China. I'm not sure how strong their forex position is, but they've been basically cut off from most of the investment that was driving that middle income growth, driving the garment and textile industry and so on. And that's an indefinite process. We don't know. The highway seems to be in good shape. The multimodal and trilateral highway seems to be in good shape, and there seems to be some sort of political consensus that it's worth maintaining that. But then I hear, anecdotally from the Myanmar staff here that it's out of control in various states, and that includes the state right on the borders of Bangladesh and with India, kidnapping and so on. So look, I can't give you a super analytical response apart from that. I think it's worth just addressing NTBs and the political issues. I think perhaps one of the key success factors in East Asia has been this type of political, let's say, homogeneity. They're less politically vigorous perhaps than the Bay of Bengal countries, and they tend to have a stronger commercial instinct, whereas practical tends to win out over politics. And that has played a key role. Also, the ASEAN agreement is broad and it's been successful in some sense, but NTBs is still a huge problem here. And individual countries are constantly blocking trade on the border, normally of agricultural goods, to protect their domestic industries or for various reasons. They're normally short-term, and they come and go. And in ASEAN, as you may know, they don't have any formal dispute settlement mechanisms because they tend to use an East Asian style of negotiation, which is to go and talk behind the scenes and say, okay, Cambodia says to Vietnam, please, you can't keep blocking our low-level processed fish. And they say to Thailand, look, we need to get the rice over the border. You can't just block it because you have a grain surplus this season. So NTBs are a challenge across the board, even in countries that are perceived to be functioning very well. I don't have any great solution, but I think the political issue and the non-tariff barriers are really key. And one way of getting over that has been to sign short-term cross-border trade agreements to eliminate that over a 1 year or 2 year period. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. I think we all would agree that we had an excellent and rich discussion over the last 1 hour or so. And I am really glad and fortunate that I am not the person who is going to summarize the discussion. It is all Nisha's task to summarize. But I thank all the panelists and of course ICRIER for inviting me to moderate this session. And I feel really very honored. And I learned quite a lot from the rich discussion. So over to you, Nisha, for summing up the discussion.
Thank you, Selim. I think the credit for this wonderful discussion goes, of course, to you for bringing out all the key issues from the panelists. So thank you very much for actually setting up a very, very vibrant and engaging session. I'm sure the audience would have enjoyed this very much. You also made my task a lot easier because you were summarizing what the panelists were saying after every intervention. So I will not summarize what the panelists said, but maybe the last part, which is the recommendations. I think I can sum them up into like four key areas where the recommendations came in. One is that there are lessons from ASEAN and the GMS, the CARIC, so the SASEC. So that was very interesting, the way the panelists actually brought in lessons from various regions, not just in the Asian region, but from other regions as well. Also, what was interesting was the corridor approach. I think that would really make implementation a lot easier, and to be able to actually see what works and what doesn't work would become very clear once this approach is adopted. Also, I think what was interesting was short-term cross-border agreements, because you can see the results very quickly. That was an interesting recommendation. Another recommendation was about having extensive stakeholder consultations, given the politics of the region and the political economy of the region. It's extremely important that for any connectivity initiative, for that matter, any initiative under BIMSTEC would have to have the political economies aspect of it built into it in a very effective manner, so that there is a continuous stakeholder engagement and there is a range of stakeholders across all issues, a range of stakeholders who need to be brought into the ambit, who need to be engaged with, and who need to be sensitized about the issues and about the resistance and other issues as well. And last but not the least, what is really required is an institutional strengthening of BIMSTEC, because without a strong BIMSTEC secretariat, we will not see successful initiatives by BIMSTEC, because a lot of effort has been put into the master connectivity plan, all the transport plans. There are several bilateral agreements, but the institutional strengthening would be key to actually see this on a sustained basis. So thank you, Selim. Thank you very much, Preetam, and thank you, Satish. Thank you, Julian, and thank you, Puspa, for making your interventions and making this session an extremely engaging one. Rupa, I think, has had to sign off, but thank you to Rupa for for giving an excellent address and giving a very broad brush of what connectivity means, the larger definition of it, and what it would mean for the region and what can be done, what kind of principles can be set to make this a region where connectivity would work. Thank you to our partners, NITI Aayog and to CAS for being our partners in this webinar series. This was the third and the last of the series, and we are hoping to come out with the compendium at the end of this webinar series. And of course, all the panelists are being requested to contribute to this compendium, because it would be a pity to lose all this information if it is not documented. So I'm sure all the panelists will cooperate on this issue and will contribute to our volume to commemorate the 25th year. Thank you. And last but not the least, thank you to all the participants who tuned in and spent their valuable time to tune into this webinar. And thank you for the questions, for again, making the session a very vibrant one. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nisha. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.